procession, this processional scene. There's one exception to this rule. The goddess of war, a Hittite goddess named Shausuka, was actually on the male side. And it's thought perhaps this is because, right, she's a goddess of war, embodying male attributes. The truth is we don't really know why she happens to be the only female goddess on the male side. But what we do know is that this male procession, this female procession, they meet in the very back of this chamber. And at the back of that chamber, we see the meeting of this sun goddess, Hebat, and this weather god of heaven, male god, Teshub, and their son, Sharuma. You can see it's a little tricky to make out, right, because this is an open-air sanctuary. It's very weathered. But what we have here is Teshub, this Hittite weather god. And again, this is Anatolia, right, a place of storms and where weather is pretty fierce. Those of you who have been to Turkey, we can see him standing here on the backs of two other gods. These are mountain gods. We can see their stylized skirts, right, where you see these sort of stylized mountains coming out of their skirts here. And right, we have the sun goddess of Arena, Hebat, this female goddess, standing on the back of a panther. Their son, Sharuna, standing behind on a lion. And this meeting, right, of course, right, these two central progressions coming to this point of nexus. We've seen this before, right? We've seen this as early as the Uruk vase, right? All these progressions leading to a point of intersection, and whether it's a king offering to a god, in this case, it's two gods coming together. The symbolism is pretty clear. In terms of gods standing on animals, if you jump back right to the investiture scene of Zimri Lim, we have the goddess Ishtar standing on top of a lion as well. And this is interesting. We see this in Syria and Anatolia particularly, and then later in Mesopotamia as well, standing on top of animals, specifically animals like panthers and lions, kind of symbolically appropriating their power, also dominating them, right? If you could stand on a lion, certainly you were in control of that animal. A little bit later, during the reign of Tudhaliya IV, Tudhaliya, he ends up inscribing an image of himself. It's about 3 meters high. It's very, very large. And he's sort of carved off to the side of these compositions that we were just talking about, almost sort of overseeing and looking at them. And again, you can see he's depicted in this traditional Hittite way with this curved staff that's sort of tucking up from underneath him. We see Tudhaliya IV also in chamber B, in which he's here again, but this time being embraced by that weather god, the same weather god we saw in chamber A, being embraced by him and brought forth into this chamber, which, again, the imagery is very clear, right? He's being embraced by the gods, accepted by the gods, and brought forth. The language that we see in the cylinder seals or the stamp seals, also in the inscriptions, is Luwian hieroglyphics. So we have the names of these individuals actually inscribed as well, but a different system of writing than the Akkadian that we're used to. That's just a Hittite language and a Hittite system. Also in Yazlakaya Chamber B, perhaps we see a link to ancestor worship. There are gods that we find that are associated with the underworld, and unfortunately Hittite mythology is a little bit bleak. We don't know the full connotations of who some of these gods are, so we don't have great names of them. Like this one is the dagger god, for example, and you can see the dagger god is this composite god made up of a series of 4 lions. He's got, again, a horned headdress, so we know he's a divinity because the Hittites are doing what the Mesopotamians do. We have horned divinities, but he's a dagger god. He's got this large dagger coming out of the bottom. We know he's associated with the underworld. Other than that, not too much. We don't know too much about him. There are a number of other gods we see in Chamber B. There are these 12 gods, again in sequence, perhaps linked to the 12 months. But as far as the inner workings of Hittite mythology, we're still a little bit in the dark. The dagger god actually does have a name. His name is Nergal. And so it seems that Chamber B actually has more to do with ancestor worship, with the worshiping of previous Hittite kings, and also gods of the underworld. And you can jump back to this structure, which is built in front of Yaslakaya. Again, it began just as a wall in around the 15th century, but by the time of Shupilulumas, by the time of Tudhalius, right, we're going to 1350 to 1200 BC, we have a very large structure that, again, would have served for processions, different ritual activity as people make their way all the way from the city, right, 1.5 kilometers away, into these structures, and as they make their way through into the temples, up staircases, and then finally getting access into these inner sanctuaries. So it's a very interesting, site, and kind of telling of specifically these Hittites who are now taking control in the north. So I'm going to jump over here, wrapping up the Hittites. I want to keep these together so they don't get too confusing. And those of you who have found the PDFs, you'll see there's a lot of overlap as we kind of go back through them. Whoops, no updating error, come on. Here we go, yeah, 22. There we go. All right, so any questions about the Hittites or about Hattusas? So we've been looking at this international system that begins, again, around 1600 BC, picking up the reins of this big collapse that we saw in the north, right? The Mitanni emerging from the remnants of Shemshi-Adad's old Assyrian Empire, taking control from Washukani, sacking Ashur, really making a name for themselves as far as a kingdom. We looked at the Mitanni. So again, this period of around 1350, Mitanni, which had been an enemy of Egypt, reaches out, and Tushratta and Amenhotep III are able to cement ties, very, very good relations between them. We read one of the letters between them at this time. Now around 1350, something pretty drastic happens in Egypt, which we'll get into. Amenhotep IV takes power. And Amenhotep IV takes an entirely new name. He names himself Akhenaten, revamps Egyptian religion entirely to focus on a single god, the Aten. It's not really monotheism, it's like henotheism. So you have the Aten, which is the central god, and then these sort of minor divinities. But for Egypt, this is a huge shift. We see him doing things like, say, refounding a capital, right? That's what you do when you change things around. That's what you do when you take power. You start a brand new capital, and he does that at the site of Amarna. Takes some of the letters with him from his father's reign, and that's why we find them there. We have all of this correspondence. But Egypt's relations with the Mitanni, while they've been very tight up to this point, now start to degrade, and Mitanni starts to weaken. We see it's in a pretty precarious position, too. Mitanni is smack in the center, right, of Egypt, of Babylon, of the Hittites. And with the Hittite Empire rising, you can see Mitanni begins to get a little bit nervous, especially when Akhenaten is so tied up with these reforms at home that he's unable to really answer all these letters. So we get these letters being sent from Tushratta, right, the letters that were so embellished with love and this and that, to Amenhotep IV, right? And Tushratta was a contemporary with Amenhotep III. Amenhotep IV stops writing to Tushratta. He stops engaging with him. And Tushratta gets so desperate for information that he starts writing to Amenhotep's wife, Queen Tai, the mother of Akhenaten. So we get these letters, one like this one, which says, "Thus speaks Tushratta, king of Mitanni, to the lady Queen Tai of Egypt. Everything is well with me. May everything be well with you. May everything go well with your house, your son. Everything be perfectly well for your soldiers, and everything belonging to you." Right? This kind of this classic introduction that these letters start with. "You are the only one who knows that I have always felt friendship for your husband, Mimuria," Amenhotep III, "your husband, and that your husband, on his part, always felt friendship for me. And all the things that I wrote and told your husband and the things that he told me were told in trust. And he wrote me incessantly through our diplomats, Kelia and Maine." So these two diplomats that would really run letters back and forth between Egypt and Mitanni. "No one knows this better than you, these things that we have told each other. So you should definitely continue sending joyful embassies to me. We should stay in contact. Do not suppress them. I shall never forget the friendship with your husband. At this moment, more than ever, I have 10 times more friendship for your son, Akhenaten, Nabkuriya. These are Hittite, transcriptions, right, of Egyptian names. You are the only one who knows the words of your husband, but you have not yet sent me the gifts which your husband has promised me in order to send to me. I asked him for massive gold statues, but your son has ignored me and only sent gold-plated statues of wood. As gold is like dust in your country, why have they not been sent to me? That your son should not have given them to me by now. Neither has he given me what your husband was accustomed to giving to me. So we get this sense of a very kind of disappointed Tushratta, somebody who is being rebuffed, and somebody also who's seeing some very dangerous developments happening in the north with land incursions by the Hittites, and also the sort of unsettling rise of kings in Assyria. So Assyria, right, we've been talking about Assyria for some time, right? This is the land of Shemshi-Adad in the Old Assyrian period. This is the city of Ashur and Mari with the old trade, Kanesh. You know, we've gone into this quite a bit. With the decline of Shemshi-Adad, this entire region sort of falls back on itself and is eventually absorbed by Mitanni. It becomes a vassal to Mitanni. And in this international system, right, we have these major powers with these kings writing to one another as brother, sending greeting gifts. There's this expected reciprocal exchange, you know, which acted not just to, sort of enforce international relations, but it was also a way of maintaining peace. It was a way of kind of understanding what was going on in the periphery. So if you're like Tushratta and all of a sudden the king of Egypt stops writing to you, you get very alarmed. Is there an attack that's mounting? Are my borders about to be invaded? What you don't do is write to somebody else's vassal. And those vassals certainly do not write to you. It's very interesting that in these archives, right, in this archive at Amarna, we see just that happen. Assyria, which has been a vassal to Mitanni, well, kind of to Mitanni and then also to Babylon at different times, begins to act up. It begins to see the weakening of Mitanni and begins to take advantage of it. And that begins with a king named Ashur-uballit, who around 1350 or so, who reigned from 1363 to 1328, he ends up taking on a new title in Ashur. Ashur, of course, right, was the center of this Kanesh trade, and it continues to flourish from the Old Assyrian period now into the Middle Assyrian period, which we're going to talk about today. Ashur-uballit takes the title of King of the Universe and presumptuously begins to write to Egypt directly. So he circumvents all of these clear restrictions, and as a vassal of somebody else begins to write straight to Egypt. And he writes, "To the king of Egypt I speak, so says Ashur-uballit, king of the land of Ashur, to your house, to your country, to your war chariotry, to your army, and your well-being may all be well." He's using the same conventions that these great kings use, even though he himself is not a great king. "I've sent you my envoys to visit you and see your country. And up until now, my forefathers have not sent envoys, but I've sent you one today, in addition to fine gifts, one chariot, 2 horses, a jewel from a precious stone, a piece of lapis lazuli shaped like a date, and as a good wish present." These are kind of weak presents when you consider everything else that's being traded, but it's a good start at least. "I've directed them unto you, and my envoy which I've sent to you, do not hold him back.